At their celebration dinner, she went to the bathroom. Two women walked in, her college friends, never noticing her inside the stall. One whispered, "Poor thing. She doesn't know he's filing for divorce next week." Her stomach dropped. She returned to the table, smiling, and handed him a red envelope. He opened it, still beaming, until he read it. His face turned white. "Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories, your own family channel. May the Almighty bless every woman with unshakable strength, endless grace, and a heart that radiates love and light. May she walk through life knowing her worth, her courage, and her beauty inspire generations. May her home be filled with laughter, her efforts always honored, and her spirit forever cherished. You are the backbone of families, the silent power behind every joy, and the warmth that heals hearts. My beautiful family, I see you are following the story, even without liking or commenting. Tell me, have you forgotten your brother, Mr. Peter, or do you think I am done? Please reply. I need to understand. Your trust and love mean everything. If your heart is true, like the video, if your love is real, write, "I am with Mr. Peter." Let's start with love. The champagne tasted like poison the moment she heard those words through the bathroom stall door. Julia Olson pressed her back against the cold metal wall, her breathing shallow, as two familiar voices echoed off the tile. Rebecca and Natalie, her college friends, the ones who'd flown in from Boston for tonight's celebration dinner. "I still can't believe you're not going to tell her," Rebecca whispered, her heels clicking toward the mirror. "What am I supposed to say?" "Hey, Jules, congratulations on your husband making partner. Oh, and by the way, he's filing for divorce next week." Julia's stomach dropped so violently she thought she might vomit. The champagne flute trembled in her hand. "Does she really not know about Melissa?" Rebecca's voice dropped even lower. "Apparently not. David's secretary. God, it's so cliché, it's almost funny." Almost. The faucet ran. Lipstick tubes clicked open sharply. Julia sat frozen on the toilet seat, her entire world collapsing into this single moment. This bathroom, these voices, this unbearable truth. "The whole firm knows. I heard she's half his age. Blonde. Of course she's blonde." "When's he planning to tell Julia?" "Who knows? Maybe tonight after everyone leaves. Maybe he'll wait until after the honeymoon phase with the secretary wears off. Men like David always come back when the new toy breaks. They think their wives will just be sitting there waiting, grateful for the scraps." Poor Julia. Rebecca's voice held pity that made Julia's skin crawl. She gave up everything for him. Her career, her MBA, everything. And for what? For this, apparently. The bathroom door swung open and their voices faded down the hallway, leaving Julia alone with the sound of her own heartbeat thundering in her ears and the distant noise of the celebration continuing without her. She stood slowly, her legs unsteady, and gripped the edge of the stall for support. The room tilted, righted itself, tilted again. She breathed through her nose, counting to 4, holding, exhaling. The technique her therapist had taught her for anxiety. She'd thought she'd never need it again after her mother's death 3 years ago. She was wrong. Julia left the stall and moved to the mirror on autopilot. The woman staring back wore a burgundy dress David had picked out last week, holding it up with that boyish grin she'd fallen in love with 10 years ago. "This color makes you look powerful," he'd said, kissing her neck. The pearls around her neck were from his mother, given to her on their 5th anniversary with tears and promises that Julia was the daughter Catherine never had. The expression on her face was one she'd perfected over years of being the supportive wife. Warm, gracious, the woman who made partners' wives feel comfortable at firm events. That woman was a stranger. Julia washed her hands mechanically, watching water swirl down the drain, and felt something cold and clear settle over her shock. Her mind moved with strange surgical precision, each thought sharp and deliberate. She'd known something was wrong for months, hadn't she? The late nights that stretched past midnight. The phone calls he took in the other room, his voice dropping to a murmur she couldn't quite hear. The way he stopped looking at her during conversations, his eyes sliding past her like she was wallpaper, like she was furniture, like she was nothing. She told herself it was the stress of the partnership decision. She'd made excuses. She'd been understanding. She'd been the perfect wife. She'd been a fool. But more than that, and this was the thought that steadied her trembling hands, made her spine straighten, made something fierce ignite in her chest. She'd been preparing for this. Not consciously, but some part of her had known. The separate bank account she'd opened last month just to organize finances better. The copies of important documents she'd made and stored at her office. The red envelope she'd been carrying in her purse for 4 days, telling herself she was being paranoid, that she'd never need it. Julia dried her hands, reapplied her lipstick with deliberate precision, and looked at her reflection one last time. The woman in the mirror had changed in the last 5 minutes. Her eyes were harder, her mouth set in a line that didn't apologize. Good. She walked back into the private dining room where 30 people celebrated her husband's success. The room glittered with wealth, crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, wine glasses catching light like diamonds. Partners and associates filled the space with laughter and the comfortable confidence of people who'd won at life. David stood at the head of the table, his arm around his senior partner, Harrison Whitmore, both men laughing at some joke she'd missed. David wore his navy suit, the one that made him look like a senator. His hair was perfect, his tie was perfect, his entire performance was flawless. Julia watched him from the doorway and felt nothing. That was the strangest part. No heartbreak, not yet. Just a vast, cold emptiness where love used to be. David saw her and his face lit up with genuine pleasure. There she is. We were about to send a search party. Everything okay, babe? Babe. He called her babe, like she was some girl he'd just started dating, not the woman who'd supported him through 3 years of law school, who'd worked 2 jobs so he could study full-time, who'd believed in him when everyone else said he'd never pass the bar on his first try. Julia moved through the crowd with deliberate grace. She stopped at her seat and reached into her purse, her fingers closing around the red envelope she'd been carrying like a talisman. "David," she said clearly, her voice cutting through the chatter. The room quieted. "I have something for you." His expression radiated joy so genuine it almost hurt to look at. "Babe, you didn't have to get me anything. Tonight is enough." "Open it," Julia said. David took the envelope, still beaming, and tore it open. Harrison leaned in curiously. The partners and associates watched with wine-flushed faces, expecting some romantic gesture. David pulled out the papers. His joy froze. The color drained from his face so completely she watched it happen in real time, red to pink to white to gray. His fingers began to shake. "What?" His voice came out hoarse. "Julia, what is this?" "Divorce papers," Julia said calmly. "I filed them 4 days ago. You'll find everything in order." The room went silent. Someone's fork clattered against a plate. A wine glass tipped over, red spreading across white linen like blood. David's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. "Julia, what are you... This isn't... We need to talk about this privately." "I disagree," Julia said. "I think this is the perfect time. You made partner today, David. Congratulations. You got everything you wanted. Now you get to lose everything that actually mattered." "Julia, please." "There's also a flash drive in the envelope," Julia continued. Every eye in the room was on her now. Rebecca and Natalie stared from their seats, faces pale. "There's a video on it. You should watch it alone tonight. Actually, you should watch it before midnight, because that's your deadline to sign." "A video of what?" David's face had gone from grey to green. Julia leaned closer, her voice low enough that only David and Harrison could hear. "A video of you and Melissa, in our bed. Last Tuesday afternoon while I was at my mother's grave on the anniversary of her death. The nanny cam I installed 3 weeks ago works beautifully. High definition, great sound quality. You can hear everything. Every lie you told her about me, every promise you made, every moment you chose her over the woman who gave you everything." David's legs buckled. He gripped the table for support, his knuckles white. "Oh, God. Julia, please." "Sign by midnight," Julia said, straightening up. "Or I send copies to every partner at Whitmore and Associates. I'm sure they'll be very interested in how you spent your Tuesday afternoons while billing clients for your time. I'm sure the Bar Association will be fascinated. I'm sure your mother will be devastated to learn what her son really is." She turned to Harrison, whose face had gone carefully blank. "Thank you for hosting this lovely dinner, Harrison. I'm sorry to cut my evening short, but I'm sure you understand. I have a new life to build, and every minute I spend in this room is a minute wasted." Julia picked up her purse and walked toward the door. Behind her, chaos erupted. Confused voices, David calling her name, chairs scraping back. She didn't turn around. She walked through the restaurant with her head high, past the maitre d', who looked concerned, past the bar where couples sat close and trusting. She made it to the parking lot before the shaking started again. The October air hit her face like a slap. Julia stood beside her car, fumbling with her keys, and let herself feel it for 30 seconds. The betrayal, the humiliation, the shattering of everything she'd built her life around. 30 seconds. Then she started the engine. Julia drove north out of the city, her phone buzzing incessantly in her purse. She didn't look at it. She knew it was David, knew that by now the entire firm was dissecting what had just happened. Let them talk. Let them gossip. She was done caring what anyone thought. She'd known where she was going. Her grandmother's lake house sat dark and empty 2 hours outside the city, inherited 6 months ago when Grandma Rose died. David had been pushing her to sell it, saying they needed the money. Now Julia understood why he'd wanted it gone. He'd wanted to erase any escape route she might have. But Rose had left Julia more than a house. She'd left her a way out. Julia pulled into the gravel driveway and cut the engine. The house looked smaller than she remembered, wrapped in shadows and overgrown lilac bushes. But it was hers. Completely, legally, irrevocably hers. David's name wasn't on any paperwork. She grabbed her suitcase from the trunk, packed yesterday and hidden in her office, because once she'd decided to leave, she'd left nothing to chance. Inside, the house smelled like dust and her grandmother's lavender sachets. Julia turned on lights and found everything exactly as Rose had left it. Floral couch worn soft with age, ancient television, kitchen table where Julia had eaten countless breakfasts during childhood visits, listening to Rose's stories about building a restaurant business from nothing. Her phone buzzed again. Julia pulled it out and saw 17 missed calls from David, 6 voicemails, texts flooding in, each one more desperate than the last. "Julia, please call me. We need to talk about this. I can explain everything. Please don't do this. I love you." That last one made her laugh, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed in the empty house. He loved her. He loved her so much he'd been planning to divorce her next week. He loved her so much he'd fucked his secretary in their bed. Julia blocked his number and tossed the phone on the couch. In the bedroom, she unpacked her suitcase with methodical precision. Clothes, toiletries, her laptop, her grandmother's jewelry box that she'd taken from the house last month, and at the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, a framed photo of her and David on their wedding day, both of them laughing, both of them so stupidly, blindly happy. Julia looked at the photo for a long moment, studied the woman in the white dress who'd believed in forever, who'd trusted completely. That woman was gone. Dead. Buried in a bathroom stall at an Italian restaurant while her friends discussed her humiliation in casual whispers. Julia opened the window and threw the frame into the darkness. She heard glass shatter against rock somewhere below, final and satisfying. She crawled into her grandmother's bed without changing clothes and stared at the ceiling. She waited for tears. They didn't come. Instead, she felt something cold and clear and sharp settling in her chest. Not grief. Not yet. Fury. Julia reached for her phone and unblocked David's number long enough to send one text. "Watch the video, sign the papers. If you contact me again before you do both, I'll make sure Harrison sees it tomorrow morning. And David, I hope it was worth it. I hope she was everything you thought I wasn't." Because you threw away a queen for a secretary who doesn't know your credit cards are maxed out and your mother's retirement fund is gone. She blocked him again and closed her eyes. Sleep didn't come. Instead, Julia lay in the darkness and thought about every lie, every late night, every time she'd excused his distance as stress. She thought about Melissa, whoever she was, and wondered if the girl knew she was just another cliché. She thought about Rebecca and Natalie standing in that bathroom pitying her. Poor Julia, she doesn't know. But Julia did know now, and knowledge was a weapon she intended to use with surgical precision. Her phone rang at midnight. Unknown number. Julia answered, her voice sharp. "What?" "Mrs. Cruz, this is Harrison Whitmore." A pause. Heavy breathing. "I think you and I need to have a conversation. Tonight. It can't wait." Julia sat up in bed, suddenly alert. "About what?" "About your husband, and about a complaint filed against him 3 days ago by his secretary, a sexual harassment complaint, one I suspect you don't know about." Julia's blood went cold. "What kind of complaint?" "The kind that could end his career," Harrison said quietly. "The kind that could destroy this firm if it goes public. Mrs. Cruz, I need to see that video. Tonight. Meet me at my office. 1 hour. Come alone." The line went dead. Julia stood in the darkness of her grandmother's bedroom, her mind racing. She'd thought she knew the full extent of David's betrayal, the affair, the lies, the casual way he'd dismantled their marriage while pretending everything was fine. But something told her she'd only scratched the surface. She grabbed her keys and headed back out into the night, driving toward whatever truth Harrison Whitmore was about to reveal. The highway stretched empty before her, streetlights flashing past like warning signals. Julia wasn't afraid of what she might learn. She was ready for it, ready to know every lie, ready to face every truth, ready to burn down everything David had built if that's what it took to ensure he could never do this to anyone else. The man she'd married was about to discover that Julia Olson wasn't just some wife he could discard. She was her grandmother's granddaughter. And Rose had taught her that the best revenge wasn't getting angry. It was getting even. And then building something so magnificent that the man who'd destroyed you would spend the rest of his life watching you thrive without him, knowing he'd had everything and threw it away for nothing. Chapter 2. The Meeting. Harrison Whitmore had built his law firm on 2 principles, excellence and discretion, and David Cruz had just destroyed both. Julia sat across from Harrison in his corner office, the city lights glittering 40 stories below. It was past 1 in the morning, the building was empty except for them and the security guard downstairs, who'd looked surprised to see anyone arriving at this hour. Harrison looked older than he had at the dinner. Without the celebration and wine, his face showed its true age, 60-something, with the kind of weariness that came from watching people disappoint you for decades. "Thank you for coming," he said, pouring coffee from a carafe that smelled like it had been sitting there since afternoon. "I know tonight has been difficult." "Tell me about the complaint," Julia said. She didn't want coffee. She didn't want pleasantries. Harrison nodded, appreciating her directness. He pulled a file from his desk drawer and slid it across to her. 3 days ago, Melissa Porter, David's secretary, filed a formal sexual harassment complaint with our HR department. She claims David coerced her into a sexual relationship by implying it would advance her career. She's threatening to sue the firm for fostering a hostile work environment. Julia opened the file. Inside were printed text messages, emails, a formal complaint form with Melissa's signature. Her hands felt numb as she read. "Is it true?" she asked. "I don't know," Harrison admitted. "David claims the relationship was consensual. He says Melissa is lying because he ended things recently and she's angry. But Julia, if this goes public, it destroys the firm's reputation. We have 7 female associates who might walk. We have clients who will pull their business. This is a catastrophe." Julia read through the messages. They were careful, coded but suggestive. "Meet me in the conference room, 3rd floor. Door will be unlocked." And David's response, "Can't wait to see you." "Why are you showing me this?" Julia asked. Harrison leaned forward. "Because you mentioned a video. If that video proves the relationship was consensual, if it shows Melissa as a willing participant, then her harassment claim falls apart. I'm not asking you to protect David. God knows he doesn't deserve it. But I'm asking you to help me understand the truth so I can protect this firm and the innocent people who work here. Julia closed the file and looked at Harrison for a long moment. She'd known this man for 8 years. He'd given David his first job out of law school. He'd promoted him. He'd treated Julia like family at every firm event. "What happens to David if I give you the video?" she asked. "If it proves consensual relationship, he avoids criminal charges and a harassment lawsuit, but he still violated firm policy by sleeping with a subordinate. I'll have to fire him. He'll keep his law license, but his career at this firm is over either way." Julia thought about David sitting in that restaurant, his face white with shock, his perfect celebration ruined. She thought about how he'd looked at her every day for months, lying with his eyes while planning to discard her like she was nothing. "I want something in exchange," she said. Harrison raised his eyebrows. "What?" "A consulting contract. Your firm needs crisis management after this scandal. I have an MBA I've never used because I spent the last 8 years supporting David's career. I want a 6-month contract, full rate, to help you manage the fallout and rebuild your reputation with female employees." Harrison stared at her. Then, slowly, he smiled. "You're tougher than I thought." "David always underestimated me too," Julia said. "It's a pattern. What's your rate?" Julia named a figure that made Harrison blink, but he nodded. "Done. I'll have contracts drawn up tomorrow. Now about that video?" Julia pulled a flash drive from her purse. "This is a copy. It shows David and Melissa in my bedroom. They're both clearly willing participants. It proves the relationship was consensual. But Harrison, this video also shows David leaving my home at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday when his timesheet shows him billing a client for 5 hours of work that day. That's billing fraud." Harrison's face went still. "Jesus Christ." "So here's my offer," Julia continued. "I give you this video. You use it to disprove Melissa's harassment claim. You fire David for violating firm policy, and you make sure he repays every fraudulently billed hour, or I go to the State Bar Association myself." "That's going to be tens of thousands of dollars," Harrison said. "I don't care. He stole from clients. He stole from this firm. He stole from me. He pays it all back." Harrison took the flash drive and rolled it between his fingers, thinking. Finally, he nodded. "Agreed. I'll handle it personally. David will repay every cent, or I'll report him myself." Julia stood. "Then we have a deal. I'll expect those consulting contracts by end of business tomorrow." "Julia." Harrison stood too. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I knew David's father. I watched him nearly destroy his family with an affair 30 years ago. I thought David learned from that. I thought he was different." "So did I," Julia said quietly. She left Harrison's office and took the elevator down 40 floors, her reflection fractured in the polished steel walls. The security guard nodded as she passed through the lobby. Outside, the city was finally quiet, that dead hour before dawn when even New York took a breath. Julia sat in her car and let herself feel the weight of what she'd just done. She'd weaponized her own humiliation. She'd turned evidence of her husband's betrayal into a business deal. Part of her felt sick, but a larger part felt electrified, powerful in a way she'd never experienced. Her phone buzzed. David, from a different number. "Julia, please, I know you're angry, but we can fix this. I love you. Please, call me." Julia deleted the message and drove back to the lake house as the sky began to lighten in the east. When she arrived, she found something waiting on the porch, a cardboard box with her name on it. Julia approached cautiously, then saw the handwriting, her grandmother's handwriting. She carried the box inside and opened it with shaking hands. Inside were letters, dozens of them, tied with ribbon, and on top, a sealed envelope marked in Rose's distinctive script, "Open when your marriage ends." Julia stared at the envelope for a long time. Then she opened it. Inside was a key and a handwritten letter. "My darling Julia, if you're reading this, then I was right to prepare for this possibility. I knew David reminded me of your grandfather. Same charm, same ambition, same wandering eye. When your grandfather cheated on me in 1965, I had nothing, no money, no career, no options. I stayed because I had to, but I never forgave him, and I never forgot. The key in this envelope opens a storage unit in Westchester. The address is below. Inside that unit, you'll find documents about the restaurant chain I built after your grandfather died. What you don't know, what I never told anyone, is that I sold that business in 1995 for $4 million. I invested every cent. The portfolio is now worth $8 million. It's all yours, Julia. My lawyer will contact you soon with details, but I structured the inheritance to release only under 2 conditions. When you turn 35, or in the event of divorce before age 35. You're 34 now, and if you're reading this, I suspect you're divorcing. This money isn't for healing, sweetheart. It's for building. Your grandfather died alone and broke while I thrived. Let David watch you rise. Let him see what he threw away. Let him spend the rest of his life knowing he had a queen and traded her for a pawn. The world told me to forgive, to move on, to make peace with his betrayal. I did none of those things, and I have no regrets. Make him watch you become everything you were meant to be. Then decide if he ever deserves to stand beside you again. All my love, Grandma Rose. Julia read the letter 3 times. Then she laughed, a sharp, startled sound that echoed in the empty house. $8 million. Her grandmother had built an empire after betrayal, had planned this safety net for years, knowing that Julia might need it someday. Had understood, perhaps from the beginning, that David Cruz was exactly like the man who'd broken Rose's heart. Julia pulled out her phone and Googled the storage unit address. Westchester, an hour away. She could be there when it opened. But first, she had a call to make. She dialed her lawyer's personal cell. He answered on the 3rd ring, groggy. "Julia, it's 5 in the morning. David's not signing the papers," Julia said. "He's going to contest the divorce. I need you to prepare for war." Her lawyer sighed. "On what grounds?" "Does it matter? He's going to fight me on everything, so I need you to do something for me. Hire the best forensic accountant you can find. I want David's finances torn apart. Every account, every transaction, every receipt. If he's hiding money, I want it found." "Julia, that's going to be expensive." "I'm about to inherit $8 million, Julia said. "Money isn't a problem anymore. Get the accountant and schedule a deposition with Melissa Porter. I want to know exactly what David promised her." There was a pause. "You're serious?" "David made a mistake," Julia said, looking at her grandmother's letter. "He thought I was weak. He thought I'd cry and forgive him and let him keep controlling our life together. He's about to learn exactly how wrong he was." She hung up and walked to the window. The sun was rising over the lake, turning the water gold. Julia stood in her grandmother's house, holding her grandmother's letter, and felt something fierce and bright burning in her chest. Not grief, not any more. Power. David wanted a fight, she'd give him a war. Chapter 3. The Inheritance. Her grandmother's storage unit held more than memories. It held 30 years of revenge, perfectly preserved. Julia stood in the fluorescent-lit hallway of Westchester Storage, the key cold in her hand. Unit 347. She'd driven here straight from the lake house, stopping only for coffee that now sat cold in her cup holder. The lock opened smoothly, as if it had been waiting for her. Julia rolled up the metal door and stared. The unit was packed floor to ceiling with boxes, filing cabinets, and plastic storage containers, all meticulously labeled in her grandmother's handwriting. Restaurant financial records 1966 to 1995. Legal documents. Personal correspondence. Business sale records. Julia pulled out her phone and started taking pictures, documenting everything. Then she began opening boxes. The first contained her grandmother's business license from 1966. Rose's Kitchen. Proprietor, Rose Marie Olson. Julia had heard stories about the restaurant, how her grandmother started with a small diner, worked 18-hour days, expanded to 3 locations, but she'd never seen the actual documents. The second box held financial records. Julia spread them across the concrete floor, her MBA brain automatically organizing the chaos. Revenue reports, tax returns, profit and loss statements. The numbers told a story of incredible growth. Rose had started with a $5,000 loan and built it into a restaurant empire worth millions. But it was the third box that made Julia's breath catch. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to Rose from her husband, Julia's grandfather, Henry. The postmarks ranged from 1965 to 1990. Julia opened one at random, dated 1972. Rose, I know you won't respond to this letter any more than you responded to the last 50, but I have to keep trying. It's been 7 years since you left me. 7 years since I destroyed our marriage with my stupidity. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I hurt you in ways that can't be repaired. But Rose, I'm dying. The doctors say it's my heart. I have maybe a year left. I'm not asking you to take me back. I'm asking you to let me see you one more time. To tell you to your face how sorry I am. To tell you that watching you build something beautiful without me has been the greatest punishment I could imagine. You were always stronger than me. Always smarter. I was a fool to think that girl at the office could ever compare to you. Please, Rose. One conversation, that's all I'm asking. Henry. Julia checked the date. 1972. She flipped through other letters and found her grandfather's death certificate. He died in 1973, alone in a VA hospital. Rose never responded to his letters, never visited, never forgave. Julia sat on the cold concrete floor and felt something shift inside her. Her grandmother had been merciless, uncompromising. She'd built an empire and let Henry die knowing he'd lost everything that mattered. Was that strength or cruelty? Julia didn't know, but she understood it. She kept digging through boxes, found newspaper clippings about Rose's business success, found photos of her grandmother at ribbon-cutting ceremonies, surrounded by employees, smiling that fierce smile Julia remembered, found legal documents from the sale of the business in 1995, $4.2 million to a restaurant investment group, and finally, in a locked metal box at the back of the unit, Julia found the investment records. Her hands shook as she read through them. Rose had taken that $4 million and invested it with frightening intelligence. Tech stocks in the 90s, index funds, real estate. The portfolio had weathered crashes and recessions and grown steadily. The most recent statement, dated 6 months before Rose's death, showed a value of $8.3 million. $8 million. All Julia's, waiting for this exact moment. Julia pulled out her phone and called her lawyer. I need you to contact my grandmother's estate attorney. There's an inheritance I need to access. $8 million. Jesus. When were you planning to mention this? I just found out. How fast can we access it? If the will is clear and the estate is settled, maybe a week. But Julia, this changes everything about the divorce. This is separate property. David has no claim to it. I know, Julia said. That's exactly why I need it now. I want David to see what he could have had. I want him to watch me build something with money he'll never touch. She hung up and kept searching through boxes. Found more letters from her grandfather, each one more desperate than the last. Found Rose's journal entries about starting the business, about the loan she took, about the discrimination she faced as a woman entrepreneur in the 60s. One entry, dated 1968, made Julia stop cold. Henry called again today, begging to come home, saying he's changed, saying the affair meant nothing. I told him the same thing I'll tell him every time he calls. I don't forgive you. I will never forgive you. Not because I'm cruel, but because forgiveness would require me to forget who I was before you broke me, and I like who I've become too much to go back. Let him live with that. Let him die with that. I'm building something he could never imagine, and he'll spend every day knowing he had me and threw me away for something cheap and temporary. That's my revenge, not anger, success. Julia took a photo of that entry. Then she loaded boxes into her car, the financial records, the letters, Rose's journals, evidence of what her grandmother had built from ashes. As she drove back to the lake house, her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered, "Mrs. Cruz? This is Catherine Cruz, David's mother." Julia's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Mrs. Cruz, please call me Catherine. Julia, I know you don't want to hear from our family right now, but I need to talk to you. There are things about David you should know. Things I should have told you years ago." "What kind of things?" Catherine's voice cracked. "Things about his father. About our marriage. About patterns I was too blind to see repeating. Please, Julia, let me buy you coffee. One conversation. Then I'll leave you alone if that's what you want." Julia thought about her grandmother's letters, about Henry dying alone, about Rose's choice to never forgive. "One conversation," Julia said. "Tomorrow morning. I'll text you the address." She hung up and drove the rest of the way in silence, her grandmother's words echoing in her mind. "That's my revenge. Not anger. Success." Back at the lake house, Julia spread her grandmother's documents across the dining room table, financial records on one side, personal letters on the other, Rose's journals in the middle. She opened her laptop and started building a business plan. Her grandmother had restaurants. Julia would have something different, something that used her MBA, her understanding of corporate strategy, her rage. She'd build a consulting firm for women going through divorce. Financial planning, legal guidance, business mentorship, everything Rose had to figure out alone, Julia would provide. She'd call it resilience consulting. Her phone buzzed. Text from her lawyer. "David's attorney just filed a motion to contest the divorce. Claims reconciliation is possible. Wants mandatory counseling. This is going to get ugly." Julia smiled grimly and texted back, "Good. Let him fight. It'll make destroying him so much more satisfying." She worked through the night, building financial projections, drafting a business model, researching commercial real estate for office space. By dawn, she had a complete business plan. She also had a meeting with Catherine Cruz in 3 hours. Julia showered and dressed in one of her power suits, black, sharp, unforgiving. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw someone new, someone harder, someone her grandmother would recognize. She drove to the cafe Catherine had suggested, a quiet place outside the city. Catherine was already there, sitting in a corner booth, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup. She looked older than Julia remembered. Frailer. "Thank you for coming," Catherine said as Julia slid into the booth. "You have 15 minutes, Julia replied. Catherine nodded, accepting the boundary. David's father had an affair when David was 12 years old, with his secretary, just like David. The whole thing lasted about a year before I found out." Julia said nothing, waiting. "I nearly left him," Catherine continued. "I packed bags. I called a lawyer. But then Robert, David's father, he broke down, completely fell apart, went to therapy, quit his job, spent 2 years proving he'd changed. And he did change, Julia. He really did. We rebuilt our marriage. He spent the rest of his life making it up to me." "Why are you telling me this?" Julia asked. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "Because I thought David learned from that. I thought watching his father's redemption taught him something. But all he learned was the performance of change, the words to say, the tears to cry. He learned how to look sorry without actually being sorry." Julia leaned back. "You think he's manipulating me?" "I think he's manipulating himself," Catherine said. "I think he convinced himself he could have both, the excitement of an affair and the security of you. I think he genuinely believed he could manage it all. And now that he's facing consequences, I think he's genuinely panicking. But Julia, panic isn't the same as change. Regret isn't the same as growth." "Why are you telling me this instead of him?" Catherine looked down at her coffee. "Because there's more. Something David doesn't know, I know." She pulled an envelope from her purse and slid it across the table. "I hired a private investigator last year. Not because of you. Because David started asking me for money. Large amounts. He said it was for investments. I got suspicious." Julia opened the envelope. Inside were bank statements, credit card bills, receipts. Her eyes scanned the numbers, and her blood went cold. Gambling, Catherine said quietly. Online poker. He's been doing it for 2 years. He's lost over $40,000. And Julia, he's been taking money from my retirement account to cover it, telling me he's investing it for me, but it's gone. All of it. Julia stared at the documents, her mind reeling. How much has he taken? $180,000, my entire retirement. I have nothing left. The cafe spun. Julia gripped the edge of the table. Does David know you found out? No, I only discovered it last week. I haven't confronted him yet because I don't know what to say. He's my son. But Julia, he's not just a cheater. He's a thief. He stole from his own mother. Julia looked at Catherine, this woman who'd loved her son enough to protect him, to forgive him, to make excuses for him, and now sat here, broken, admitting the truth. What do you want me to do with this information? Julia asked carefully. I want you to protect yourself, Catherine said. I want you to know exactly who you married before you make any decisions about forgiveness. And I want you to know that if you destroy him, I won't blame you. I'll probably thank you. Julia took the envelope and stood. I need to go. Julia. Catherine grabbed her hand. I know you're hurting, but please don't become so hard that you lose yourself. Rose, your grandmother, I knew her. She was brilliant and strong and successful, but she died alone. She never let herself love again after Henry. Don't let David take that from you too. Julia pulled her hand away gently. Maybe being alone is better than being with someone who makes you feel alone. She left Catherine in the cafe and walked to her car, the envelope burning in her hands. David wasn't just unfaithful. He was an addict, a thief, a man who'd stolen from his own mother to feed his compulsion. Julia sat in her car and called her lawyer. We need to talk, she said. I just found out David has a gambling addiction and he's been stealing from his mother. I need a forensic accountant immediately. And I need to know, can we use this in the divorce? Her lawyer whistled low. If we can prove he's been hiding assets or lying about finances, absolutely. This changes everything, Julia. Everything. Julia started the engine. Good, because I'm about to burn his entire life to the ground. Chapter 4. The Battlefield. David Cruz had made 3 critical mistakes: cheating on his wife, underestimating her intelligence, and forgetting she had 8 million reasons to destroy him. The divorce proceedings began in a sterile conference room 40 stories above Manhattan. Julia sat beside her lawyer, Marcus Brennan, one of the most aggressive divorce attorneys in New York. Across the table sat David and his attorney, Gerald Hammond, a silver-haired man known for getting cheating husbands favorable settlements. David looked terrible. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, his hair uncombed. He kept glancing at Julia like he was searching for something familiar, some trace of the woman he'd married. She gave him nothing. Let's begin, Gerald said, his voice smooth as oil. My client is contesting this divorce on the grounds that the marriage is salvageable. He's willing to attend counseling, take a leave from work, do whatever necessary to repair the relationship. Marcus didn't even look up from his notes. Your client is a documented adulterer who violated his firm's ethics policies and was fired. My client has zero interest in reconciliation. The affair was a mistake, Gerald continued. A one-time lapse in judgment during a stressful period. Mr. Cruz takes full responsibility and wants the opportunity to make amends. Julia laughed, a short, sharp sound that made David flinch. One time, she said. The affair lasted 6 months. That's not a lapse in judgment. That's a lifestyle choice. Gerald's smile never wavered. Emotions are understandably high. However, let's focus on the practical matters. Mr. Cruz is willing to offer a generous settlement, 50-50 split of all marital assets, including the home, savings, and his partnership buyout from the firm. How generous, Marcus said dryly, considering that's exactly what the law requires anyway. But let's talk about those assets, shall we? He slid a folder across the table. My client recently inherited $8 million from her grandmother. Separate property, legally untouchable by your client. So when you say 50-50 split, You're really talking about splitting assets worth approximately $300,000. Julia's walking away with $8 million regardless. David's face went white. What? $8 million? You didn't know? Julia asked sweetly. Funny. There's a lot you don't know about me, apparently. You were too busy with Melissa to pay attention. Gerald recovered quickly. The inheritance is irrelevant to this proceeding. Let's discuss the marital assets. Let's discuss fraud, Marcus interrupted. He pulled out another folder. Over the past 6 months, Mr. Cruz withdrew $40,000 from the couple's joint account through small incremental withdrawals. He claimed these were for household expenses. They weren't. He spread out bank statements. The money went to offshore gambling sites. My client had no knowledge of this gambling addiction or the financial drain it represented. David's attorney looked at David sharply. Is this true? David's voice came out strangled. It was under control. I was going to replace the money. With what? Marcus asked. You lost your partnership. You're unemployed. And according to these credit card statements, you're $70,000 in debt from gambling losses. You've been living on credit for months. Gerald's smooth demeanor cracked slightly. We weren't informed of any gambling issues. I need time to consult with my client. There's more, Marcus said. He pulled out Catherine's bank statements. Mr. Cruz also withdrew $180,000 from his mother's retirement account over the past 2 years. Told her he was investing it. He wasn't. It went to gambling debts and funding his affair with Ms. Porter. That's theft from a family member. Potentially criminal, certainly grounds for a very unfavorable divorce settlement. David's head dropped into his hands. Oh, God. Julia watched him with cold detachment. This was the man she'd loved. The man she'd supported through law school, through the bar exam, through every career setback. She'd believed in him, built her life around him, and he'd stolen from his own mother to fund his addictions. Here's our offer, Marcus said. Julia gets the house, the car, and all marital savings. David gets nothing except his debts. Julia won't press charges for theft if David enters treatment for gambling addiction and signs a promissory note to repay his mother every cent. He has 48 hours to agree, or we file criminal charges and go public with everything. That's extortion, Gerald sputtered. That's justice, Marcus replied. Your client is a thief and an addict. My client is being more generous than he deserves. David finally looked up, his eyes desperate. Julia, please. You don't understand. The gambling, it's a disease. I need help. I know I screwed everything up, but you can't destroy me like this. Can't I? Julia asked quietly. You destroyed me, David. You stole my trust. You stole my future. You stole from your own mother. Why should I show you mercy you never showed me? Because you're better than this, David said, tears streaming down his face. Because you're not cruel. Because somewhere inside you still love me. Julia stood. You're right, I'm not cruel. That's why I'm giving you 48 hours instead of calling the police right now. That's all the mercy you're getting from me. She walked out of the conference room, Marcus following. In the elevator, her hands shook. You did great, Marcus said. He's going to take the deal. I know, Julia said. But she didn't feel victorious. She felt hollow. Outside, the November air bit at her face. Julia walked 3 blocks before stopping, leaning against a building, trying to catch her breath. She pulled out her phone and saw a text from an unknown number. Mrs. Cruz, this is Melissa Porter. I need to talk to you. It's important, please. Julia stared at the message. The other woman, the home wrecker. The girl David had chosen over her. She should delete it. Block the number. Move on. Instead, she texted back, Where and when? The response came immediately. Tomorrow, I'll send you an address. Come alone. There are things about David you need to know. Things I wish someone had told me before I got involved. Julia pocketed her phone and walked back to her car. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. Make him watch you become everything you were meant to be. But first, she needed to know the whole truth. Every lie, every secret, every piece of the man she'd married and never really known. Tomorrow, she'd meet Melissa Porter, and then she'd decide exactly how much of David Cruz's life she was going to burn. Chapter 5. The Truth. Melissa Porter looked nothing like the homewrecker Julia imagined. She looked terrified. They met at a diner in Queens, far from anywhere David might accidentally appear. Melissa sat in a back booth, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup, her leg bouncing nervously under the table. She was young, 26 maybe, with blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and circles under her eyes that suggested she hadn't slept properly in days. Julia slid into the booth across from her and waited. "Thank you for coming," Melissa said. Her voice was smaller than Julia expected, younger. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," Julia replied. "Give me one reason not to walk out right now." Melissa pulled a manila folder from her bag and pushed it across the table. "Because David's attorney is lying. About the pregnancy. About me. About everything." Julia opened the folder. Inside were medical records, text messages, bank statements. She started reading, her confusion growing with each page. "I'm not pregnant," Melissa said quietly. "I never was. David's attorney made that up to try to reduce your divorce settlement. He claimed David would have future child support obligations, so you shouldn't get as much. It's fraud." Julia looked up sharply. "Did David know?" "I don't think so. Gerald Hammond is the one who contacted me 2 weeks ago, offered me $10,000 to say I was pregnant with David's baby. I refused. Then he threatened to destroy my career if I didn't cooperate, so I went to a lawyer." Julia's mind raced. "Why are you telling me this?" Melissa's eyes filled with tears. "Because I'm not a monster, even though I did a monstrous thing. I knew David was married. I knew what we were doing was wrong. But he told me you two were separated, that the marriage was over in everything but paperwork. He said you were cold, focused only on your career, that you'd grown apart years ago." "I worked 60-hour weeks supporting him through law school," Julia said, her voice tight. "I gave up my own career to build his. We went on date nights. We talked about having kids. There was no separation." Melissa's face crumbled. "I know that now. But Julia, he was so convincing. He'd show me texts where you were short with him, tell me about arguments you'd had. He made you sound like the villain, made himself the victim of a loveless marriage. I actually felt sorry for him." Julia laughed bitterly. "He rewrote our entire history to justify cheating. Classic narcissist move." "There's more," Melissa said. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through messages. "The affair wasn't about me. It was about him running from his problems. He gambled away your savings, stole from his mother, and instead of facing it, he started sleeping with me. I was an escape, a fantasy, someone who didn't know about his debts or his addiction or his failures." "When did you figure this out?" 3 months ago. I found his gambling apps on his phone when he left it in the conference room, confronted him. He broke down, admitted everything, the addiction, the debt, the theft from his mother, begged me not to tell anyone, said he'd get help. I ended things right there." Melissa wiped her eyes. "Then you served him divorce papers and he panicked, tried to come back to me saying he'd leave you and we could start over. I told him to go to hell." Julia studied Melissa's face, looking for deception. She found only exhaustion and regret. "Why should I believe you?" Julia asked. "You could be working with him. This could be another manipulation." Melissa unlocked her phone and handed it to Julia. "Read everything, the texts, the voicemails, all of it. You'll see I'm telling the truth." Julia scrolled through months of messages. David's promises to leave Julia, his lies about his marriage, his desperate pleas when Melissa ended things. But she also found messages from Gerald Hammond, David's attorney, threatening Melissa, offering her money, pressuring her to lie about a pregnancy. And then she found something else, a text thread between David and someone named Vincent. "Who's Vincent?" Julia asked. Melissa's face darkened. "David's bookie. He owes him $30,000. Vincent's been threatening him. That's why David was so desperate about the divorce settlement. He needs money to pay off gambling debts before Vincent does something worse than threaten." Julia took pictures of everything with her own phone, evidence, ammunition. "There's one more thing," Melissa said. She pulled out another document. "Catherine, David's mother, she came to see me last week, showed me proof that David stole from her, asked if I knew anything. I told her everything, about the gambling, about Vincent, about the fake pregnancy scheme. She's the one who suggested I contact you, said you deserve to know the full truth." Julia sat back, her mind spinning. Catherine had orchestrated this meeting, had pushed Melissa to confess, was trying to protect Julia even though it meant exposing her own son's crimes. "What do you want from me?" Julia asked. "Forgiveness." "No," Melissa said. "I don't deserve that. I want you to destroy him. Not because I'm bitter, but because he's dangerous. He's going to do this to someone else. He's going to lie and steal and manipulate until someone stops him. I can't be that person. I'm just his secretary. I have no power. But you can end him." Julia looked at the scared young woman across from her and felt something unexpected. Not pity exactly, but recognition. Melissa had been used, just like Julia had. David was skilled at finding people's vulnerabilities and exploiting them. "I'm not partnering with you for revenge," Julia said finally, "but I will use this information. And Melissa, get a better job. You're too smart to be anyone's escape fantasy." Melissa nodded, relief flooding her face. "I'm interviewing at other firms next week. I can't work in that building anymore. Too many people know." Julia stood to leave, then paused. "One question. Did you love him?" Melissa looked away. "I thought I did. But I don't think you can really love someone who's lying to you about everything. I loved the person he pretended to be. The real David? I don't think I ever met him. I'm not sure anyone has." Julia left the diner and sat in her car for a long time, processing everything. David wasn't just a cheater, he was a con artist who'd fooled everyone, his wife, his mistress, his mother, his firm. He'd built an entire life on lies and manipulation, and now it was all collapsing. Her phone rang. Marcus, her lawyer. "Julia, we've got a problem. David's not signing the settlement offer. He's filed a counter motion claiming you're hiding assets and trying to extort him. His attorney is playing hardball." Julia smiled grimly. "Let him play. I just got evidence that his attorney tried to bribe David's ex-girlfriend to fake a pregnancy claim. That's fraud and extortion. File a complaint with the Bar Association. Gerald Hammond's career is about to end." Marcus whistled. "You're playing chess while they're playing checkers." "I learned from the best," Julia said, thinking of her grandmother. She drove back to the lake house as the sun set, painting the sky blood red. Inside, she spread out all her evidence: Melissa's documents, Catherine's bank statements, David's gambling records, text messages from his bookie. She took photos of everything and backed them up in 3 separate locations. Then she called Harrison Whitmore. "Harrison, it's Julia. I need to add something to our consulting contract. I want to handle David's termination case personally. I want to be the one who presents the evidence to the partners. I want him to see me do it." There was a pause. "That's brutal, Julia. He stole from clients. He lied to you. He destroyed your firm's reputation. Someone needs to hold him accountable, and I'm the only one who will." Harrison sighed. "You're hired. Partner meeting is next Tuesday. Be ready." Julia hung up and opened her laptop. She built a presentation, every piece of evidence, every lie, every theft, laid out in excruciating detail. David's affair, his gambling addiction, his fraud, his theft from his own mother. By the time she finished, it was past midnight. Julia looked at the completed presentation and felt no satisfaction, only grim determination. Her phone buzzed. Text from David. "Julia, please, I know what you're doing. I know you have evidence. But if you destroy me publicly, you destroy my mother too. Everyone will know she was robbed by her own son. Please, I'm begging you. Give me a chance to make this right." Julia stared at the message for a long moment. Then she typed back, "You had years of chances. You chose to waste all of them. What happens next is entirely your fault." She blocked his number and closed her laptop. Outside, the lake was black and still. Julia stood on the porch and thought about her grandmother, about Rose choosing not to forgive, not to compromise, not to give Henry another chance. Had Rose been right? Or had she wasted decades of her life on anger? Julia didn't have an answer, but she knew one thing. David Cruz was about to learn that mercy was a privilege, not a right. And he'd lost all his privileges the moment he chose to destroy their marriage for a gambling rush and a young secretary who never really knew him at all. Chapter 6. The Empire. Julia Olson had spent 15 years being Mrs. David Cruz, and it took one morning to decide she'd rather be a queen. The partner meeting at Whitmore and Associates was scheduled for 10 o'clock. Julia arrived at 9, carrying her presentation on a flash drive and wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than David's monthly rent. Harrison met her in the lobby, his face grave. "Last chance to back out," he said. "Once you do this, there's no going back. You'll have made an enemy for life." "David made that choice," Julia replied. "I'm just delivering the consequences." They rode the elevator to the 42nd floor in silence. The conference room was already filling with partners, 12 men and 3 women, the people who'd built this firm from nothing. They looked at Julia with curiosity. Most had met her at firm events, knew her as David's supportive wife. None of them knew who she'd become. Harrison called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. You know Julia Cruz, or rather Julia Olson. She's taking back her maiden name. As of last week, Julia is our newest consulting partner, hired to help rebuild our reputation after recent ethical violations. Julia, the floor is yours." Julia connected her laptop to the projector. 3 months ago, David Cruz was fired from this firm for violating ethics policies. Today, I'm here to show you that his termination didn't go far enough. She clicked to the first slide, bank statements showing fraudulent billing. David billed clients for hours he didn't work. While you believed he was researching cases, he was in hotel rooms with his secretary. While you trusted him with client matters, he was gambling away firm resources. Over 18 months, David stole approximately 47 hours of billable time, representing $60,000 in fraudulent charges to clients. The partners shifted uncomfortably. Julia clicked to the next slide. David also violated client confidentiality. He discussed case details with Melissa Porter, who had no clearance during their affair. This represents a potential malpractice liability for the firm. She showed text messages where David had vented about difficult clients, sharing privileged information with Melissa. The female partners' faces hardened. Additionally, David's attorney, Gerald Hammond, attempted to suborn perjury by bribing Ms. Porter to fake a pregnancy claim in order to reduce my divorce settlement. I have recordings of these conversations. I've already filed a complaint with the State Bar Association. Mr. Hammond will likely face disbarment. Now the room buzzed with angry whispers. Gerald Hammond was a friend to several partners. Julia had just ended his career. "Why are you telling us this?" one partner demanded. "Because David is trying to get hired at competing firms," Julia said. "He's using your names as references, telling prospective employers he left voluntarily to pursue other opportunities. He's lying about why he was terminated, and every time he does that, he exposes this firm to potential liability." She clicked to the final slide, a draft email to every major law firm in New York, detailing David's ethical violations and warning them against hiring him. "I'm proposing we send this letter to protect the firm and warn the legal community. David Cruz should never practice law again." Silence fell over the room. Then one of the senior partners, a woman named Margaret Chen, spoke. "This is extreme, Julia. Whatever David did to you personally—" "This isn't personal," Julia interrupted. "David stole from this firm. He endangered your clients. He committed fraud. If you don't take action, he'll do it somewhere else. And eventually, one of you will end up in court defending a malpractice suit because you stayed silent." Harrison stood. "Julia's right. We need to protect ourselves and the profession. I'm recommending we send the letter and report David to the State Bar for a formal ethics investigation. All in favor?" 12 hands went up. The three female partners were first. "Motion passes," Harrison said. "Julia, draft the letter. We'll send it today." Julia nodded, but she wasn't finished. "There's one more thing. I'd like to propose a firm initiative, create a fund to support employees who face harassment or ethical violations. Make it clear that anyone who speaks up will be protected, not punished." Melissa Porter tried to report David's behavior early on and was ignored. That can't happen again. Margaret Chen's expression softened. "I second that proposal. What would you need?" $200,000 in seed funding, and I want to chair the committee personally." The partners looked at each other. Then, one by one, they agreed. Julia left the meeting an hour later with everything she'd wanted. David's reputation was destroyed. His ability to practice law was finished. And she'd built something good from the ashes of his betrayal, but she felt empty, hollow. Victory tasted like nothing. Outside the building, she called Catherine. "It's done. David's career is over." Catherine was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel?" "I don't know," Julia admitted. "I thought I'd feel powerful. Instead, I just feel tired." "That's because revenge isn't actually satisfying," Catherine said gently. "It just creates more pain. Julia, I know David hurt you terribly, but destroying him won't heal you. Only building something new will." "That's what I'm doing," Julia said. "Resilience Consulting launches next month. I've already got 3 clients lined up." "Good. Focus on that. Let David face his own consequences. You don't need to pour gasoline on the fire." They hung up and Julia walked to her car, but Catherine's words stuck with her. Was she pouring gasoline on the fire, or was she simply ensuring David couldn't hurt anyone else? Her phone rang. Unknown number. Against her better judgment, Julia answered. "You destroyed my life." David's voice was ragged, broken. "I can't get hired anywhere. Firms are blacklisting me. My mother won't speak to me. I've lost everything because of you." "No," Julia said calmly. "You lost everything because of you. I just made sure everyone knew the truth. I'm not a monster, Julia. I'm sick. I have an addiction. I need help, not punishment." "Then get help. Check yourself into rehab. Join Gamblers Anonymous. Get therapy. But don't expect me to fund your recovery or protect you from consequences. You're an adult. Act like one." She hung up before he could respond, but her hands were shaking. She drove back to the lake house and sat on the porch, watching the late winter sun set over the frozen lake. Her phone buzzed with an email. Harrison had sent the first draft of the committee charter for the Employee Protection Fund. Reading through it, Julia felt something shift. This was why she'd done all of this, not just to hurt David, but to build something that would help others. Over the next weeks, Julia threw herself into work. She finalized her business plan for Resilience Consulting, signed a lease on office space downtown, hired a marketing consultant, reached out to divorce attorneys and therapists to build a referral network. She also did something unexpected. She donated $180,000 to Catherine's retirement account, replacing every cent David had stolen. She did it anonymously through her lawyer, so Catherine would never know it came from her. When Catherine called crying about a mysterious angel donor, Julia said nothing. Some kindnesses didn't need acknowledgement. 3 months passed. Resilience Consulting officially opened. Julia's first client was a woman whose husband had hidden assets in offshore accounts. Her second was a mother of 3, whose husband had gambled away their college fund. Her third was a teacher whose husband had maxed out credit cards to fund an affair. Every woman's story echoed Julia's own. Every time she helped someone, she felt herself healing. But late at night, when the office was empty and she was alone with her thoughts, Julia still thought about David. Not with love, that had died completely, but with something complicated and unresolved. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, Harrison called. "Julia, I need to tell you something. David's in the hospital, collapsed at his new job, the paralegal position at that non-profit legal clinic. They're saying it's a heart attack. He's in intensive care." Julia's world tilted. Is he going to survive? "They don't know. It's bad, Julia. His mother's asking if you'll come. Julia closed her eyes. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She drove to the hospital on autopilot, her mind blank. She found Catherine in the ICU waiting room, looking 20 years older than the last time they'd spoken. "Thank you for coming," Catherine whispered. "You didn't have to." "How is he?" "Critical. They're not sure he'll make it through the night. His heart was already weak from the stress and the addiction. This might be the end." Julia looked through the window into David's room. He lay unconscious, hooked to machines, his face grey and hollow. She felt nothing. And then, terrifyingly, she felt everything, rage and grief and pity and horror all at once. "Can I go in?" Julia heard herself ask. "You still care about him," Catherine said, not a question. "I don't know what I feel," Julia admitted. She went into David's room and stood beside his bed. Up close, he looked even worse. Gaunt, aged, destroyed. This was what his choices had done to him. The lying, the stealing, the running from consequences. It had literally broken his heart. Julia pulled up a chair and sat. She didn't touch him. She just sat there, watching the machines breathe for him, and tried to understand what she was feeling. "You did this to yourself," she whispered. "Every single choice that led here was yours, and I don't forgive you. I don't know if I ever will." She stayed for an hour. Then she left without looking back. Outside, she found Catherine in the hallway. "He's going to survive or he isn't," Julia said. "But either way, I'm done carrying this. I've built something good. I'm helping people. That's enough for me." She drove home and didn't look back. Chapter 7. The Transformation. Watching David Cruz humble himself wasn't satisfying. It was terrifying because Julia recognized something she'd been denying for months. She still cared. David survived the heart attack. Barely. He spent 2 weeks in the hospital, then another month in cardiac rehab. Julia heard about his recovery through Harrison, who stayed in touch with Catherine. She didn't visit again, didn't call, didn't send flowers or cards. She focused on her business. Resilience Consulting exploded. Within 6 months, Julia had helped 50 women navigate divorce, rebuild finances, start businesses. A local newspaper did a feature story, then a national magazine. Forbes reached out for an interview. Former corporate wife builds empire from ashes of divorce. That was the headline. Julia sat for photos in her downtown office, surrounded by testimonials from grateful clients, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Pride. The article went viral. Julia's phone rang constantly with new client inquiries, speaking requests, media opportunities. She hired 2 full-time staff members, opened a second office, started developing an online course for women who couldn't afford one-on-one consulting. She dated casually a marketing executive named James, a surgeon named Ethan Cross. Both were handsome, successful, attentive. Both wanted something serious. Julia kept them at arm's length, claiming she needed time to focus on work. The truth was more complicated. She compared everyone to David, and they all fell short. Not because David was better, but because no one else understood the depth of what she'd survived. It made her furious that even now, even after everything, David Cruz still had power over her emotional life. One evening, Julia stayed late at the office reviewing client files. Her assistant had left hours ago. The building was quiet except for the hum of heating vents and distant traffic. Her phone rang. "Harrison." "Did I catch you at a bad time?" he asked. "I'm working. What's up?" "I thought you should know. David started sending Catherine money. $500 a month. It's not much, but it's everything he has after rent and food. He's working as a paralegal at that non-profit, making $45,000 a year. Every spare cent goes to his mother." Julia was silent. "He's also in therapy twice a week," Harrison continued. "Real therapy, not just checking a box. And he's been attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings for 8 months straight. No relapses." "Why are you telling me this?" Julia asked. "Because I know you, Julia. You've spent the last year convincing yourself David is irredeemable. I'm not saying he deserves forgiveness. I'm saying he's actually changing. That's rare. Most people I've watched fall just keep falling. David stopped. That's his choice, Julia said. It doesn't involve me, doesn't it? Harrison asked gently. You're still asking about him every time we talk. You still freeze when Catherine mentions his name. You're successful, brilliant, powerful, but you're not happy. And I think you won't be happy until you face what you're actually feeling. Julia hung up without responding. She sat in her dark office, her reflection ghost-like in the window, and let Harrison's words sink in. Was she unhappy? Or just untethered? She'd built her identity around being David's wife, then around being his victim, then around being his destroyer. But who was Julia Olson when she wasn't defined by David Cruz at all? The question kept her up at night. 3 weeks later, Julia met her best friend Simone for coffee. They'd known each other since college, but work had pulled them apart in recent years. Simone was a therapist, which meant she saw through Julia's careful facade immediately. You look successful and miserable, Simone said bluntly. Thanks, Julia replied. Always knew I could count on you for brutal honesty. I'm serious. You've built this incredible business. You're helping people. You're financially secure. But Jules, you look exhausted. When's the last time you did something just for joy? Julia thought about it. I don't know. That's the problem. You're running so hard you've forgotten what you're running toward. Or maybe you're just running away from feelings you don't want to deal with. I've dealt with everything, Julia said defensively. I left David. I divorced him. I built a new life. But you didn't process it. You weaponized your pain instead of feeling it. And now you're stuck because you can't move forward and you won't move backward. Julia set down her coffee cup. What do you want me to say? That I still think about him? That I wonder if he's actually changed? That sometimes I hate myself for caring at all? Yes, Simone said. Say all of that. Feel all of that. Stop pretending you're fine when you're clearly not. Julia's eyes burned. He destroyed me, Simone. He took everything I believed about my life and revealed it was all a lie. How am I supposed to forgive that? How am I supposed to let that go? I'm not telling you to forgive him. I'm telling you to forgive yourself for still having feelings about it. You're human, Jules. You loved him for years. That doesn't just evaporate because he proved he didn't deserve it. They sat in silence for a while. Finally, Julia asked, if David showed up today and asked for nothing, would I still feel nothing? Simone smiled sadly. Only you can answer that. Julia went home and couldn't stop thinking about the question. She pulled out her laptop and Googled David's name, something she'd avoided for months. What she found shocked her. David had published an essay in a legal journal about addiction and professional ethics. The piece was raw, honest, unflinching. He described his gambling addiction, his theft from clients and his mother, his affair. He took full responsibility. No excuses, no blame shifting. But the second half of the essay was different. He wrote about recovery, about the men's accountability group he'd joined for addicts, about learning to sit with shame instead of running from it, about how his ex-wife, he didn't name Julia but it was obvious, had saved his life by refusing to save him. The greatest gift anyone ever gave me was consequences, he'd written. My ex-wife could have forgiven me, could have made excuses, could have protected me from my own choices. Instead, she let me fall. And falling was the only thing that made me stop lying to myself about who I'd become. Julia read the essay 3 times. Then she closed her laptop and cried. Deep, wrenching sobs she'd been holding back for a year. She cried for her broken marriage, for the man she'd thought she knew, for the woman she'd been before everything shattered, for all the time she'd lost being angry instead of grieving. When the tears finally stopped, Julia felt lighter, emptier, but lighter. Her phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Julia, it's David. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I'm not asking for anything. I just need you to know something. The man you married was a lie. The man I'm becoming is real. And everything I'm doing now, every change I'm making, I'm doing because you showed me what integrity actually looks like. You saved my mother from me, you saved this profession from me, and you saved me from myself, even though you hate me. I don't expect forgiveness, I don't expect anything, but thank you for everything." Julia stared at the message for 20 minutes. Then she typed back, "Stop texting me, I mean it." She blocked the number, but she saved the message. Chapter 8. The letter. The envelope wasn't marked, but Julia knew David's handwriting the way she once knew his heartbeat. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, sitting on her desk when Julia came into the office. Plain white envelope, no return address, just her name written in David's careful script. Her assistant hadn't seen who delivered it. It had been slipped under the door before anyone arrived. Julia stared at it for 5 full minutes before opening it. Inside was a letter, handwritten, not typed, 6 pages. Julia took it to her private office, closed the door, and started reading. "Julia, my therapist says I need to release the hope that you'll ever speak to me again. She says I'm clinging to the possibility of your forgiveness as another form of escape, a way to avoid accepting the full weight of what I did. So this letter isn't asking for anything. It's just saying the things I need to say, even if you never respond. You were right about everything. I was a thief, a liar, a coward. I stole from clients, from my mother, from you. I blamed my addiction, my stress, my father's legacy, anything but myself. I destroyed our marriage and then tried to rewrite history so I wouldn't have to be the villain in my own story. Therapy taught me something I never wanted to face. I became my father, not despite watching him hurt my mother, but because of it. I saw him have his affair, watched my mother almost leave, and then watched him grovel and cry and perform redemption until she took him back. I learned that love meant always getting another chance, that I'm sorry was a magic spell that erased consequences. But you didn't follow that script. You refused to forgive on command. You let me fall. You let me face real consequences for the first time in my life. And Julia, that's the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. When I collapsed from the heart attack, I woke up thinking I was dying, and my first thought wasn't, I love my life. It was, I've wasted every day of it lying. That's what finally broke through my denial. I've been sober from gambling for 10 months now. I go to meetings 5 times a week. I'm paying my mother back $500 a month. It'll take me 30 years to repay what I stole, but I'm doing it. I'm working at a legal aid clinic, making a quarter of what I used to make, and it's the first honest work I've done in years. I also joined a men's group for addicts learning accountability. We meet every Thursday. Most of these guys are like me, men who destroyed good women who loved them, who blamed everyone but themselves, who performed change without actually changing. We hold each other accountable. We call out each other's bullshit. It's brutal and necessary, and it's saving my life. But here's what I really need to tell you. You didn't just show me my failures. You showed me what strength actually looks like. You saved my mother from poverty when I was the one who stole from her. You built a business helping other women survive what I put you through. You turned your pain into something beautiful and useful while I was busy drowning in self-pity. I don't expect forgiveness, Julia. I don't deserve contact. I gave up the right to your time or attention or grace the moment I chose Melissa over you, the moment I chose gambling over our future, the moment I chose lies over truth. This letter is just to say, you were the best thing in my life, and I treated you like you were optional. I understand now what I destroyed, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life becoming someone who would have deserved you. Not because I think I'll get you back, but because you showed me who I could be if I stopped lying to myself. Thank you for refusing to save me. Thank you for letting me hit bottom. Thank you for caring enough about me to let me face consequences. I hope you're happy, Julia. I hope you're building something extraordinary. I hope you find someone who sees your worth from the beginning and never takes it for granted. You deserved so much better than me, but you also saved me from myself, and I'll never stop being grateful for that, even though it cost you everything. David. Julia read the letter twice. Then she sat at her desk, tears streaming down her face, and felt something inside her finally break open. This was the truth she'd been avoiding. Part of her still loved him. Not the man who'd betrayed her. She hated that man. But somewhere buried under all the lies and addiction and selfishness, there might still be the person she'd fallen in love with. The question was whether David could actually become that person, or if this was just another performance. She didn't know, and not knowing was agony. Julia folded the letter carefully and put it in her desk drawer. She didn't respond. Couldn't respond. What would she even say? Over the next weeks, Julia threw herself even harder into work. She launched her online course, appeared on 2 podcasts, signed a book deal for a memoir about building a business after divorce. But the letter haunted her. She reread it late at night when she couldn't sleep. She analyzed every word for signs of manipulation and found none. Just honesty, raw, painful honesty. Then, 3 months after the letter, Julia got a call that changed everything. "Julia, it's Catherine. I need you to come to the hospital. David collapsed again. They don't know if he's going to make it this time." Julia's hands went numb. What happened? His heart. It's failing. They said the first attack did more damage than they realized. He needs a transplant, but he's not eligible for the list because of his medical history. "Julia," Catherine's voice broke. "He's dying." Julia sat frozen in her office, the phone pressed to her ear, and realized she was about to lose the choice of whether to forgive him. Death would make that decision for her. "I'm coming," she said. She grabbed her keys and drove to the hospital, her mind racing. This was it. The moment where she had to decide what she actually felt, because once David was gone, she'd live forever with whatever she chose not to say. The universe wasn't giving her more time to process. It was forcing her hand, and Julia had no idea what she was going to do. Chapter 9. The Hospital. Julia Olson stood outside David Cruz's ICU room and realized that anger was easier than the truth. She'd never stopped loving him, and she hated herself for it. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and desperation. Catherine sat in the waiting room, her face ravaged by tears. She stood when she saw Julia, relief flooding her features. "Thank you for coming," Catherine whispered. "I know you don't owe him anything, but—" "Where is he?" Julia interrupted. "Room 12. They're letting family in one at a time. I'll tell them you're his wife." "I'm not his wife," Julia said automatically. "You're the closest thing he has," Catherine replied. Julia walked down the sterile hallway, her heels clicking against linoleum. Through the window she could see David hooked to machines, his chest rising and falling mechanically. He looked like he'd aged a decade, gaunt, grey, his hair gone prematurely white at the temples. A doctor intercepted her before she could enter. "Are you family?" "Yes," Julia lied. "His heart is failing. The first attack caused more damage than we initially thought. Without a transplant, he has maybe 6 months. With one, good chance of recovery. But he's not eligible for the transplant list because of his medical history and the addiction issues." "I'm sorry." Julia nodded numbly. "Can I see him?" "5 minutes. He's sedated, but he might be aware of your presence." Julia entered the room. The machines beeped rhythmically, the only sound besides her own breathing. She pulled a chair beside the bed and sat, staring at David's face. This was the man who'd destroyed her, who'd lied to her for years, who'd stolen from his own mother to feed an addiction, who'd rewritten their entire history to justify cheating. This was also the man who'd made her laugh until she cried, who'd held her through her mother's death, who'd believed in her MBA when she'd doubted herself, who'd once been her best friend. Both versions were true. That was the unbearable part. "I don't know what to do with you," Julia whispered. "Part of me wants you to suffer. Part of me wants you to live long enough to actually become the man you're pretending to be. And part of me just wants this whole nightmare to be over so I can stop carrying you around in my head." David's eyes fluttered open. He stared at her, confused, like he thought he was dreaming. "Julia?" His voice came out hoarse, barely audible. "I'm here," she said. Tears leaked from the corners of his eyes. "You came." "Don't make this a big thing," Catherine called. "I came. That's all." David tried to smile, but it came out as a grimace. "Even now you can't just be kind to me. You have to qualify it." You don't deserve uncomplicated kindness, Julia replied. I know. He closed his eyes. I'm dying, Julia. The doctors won't say it directly, but I know. My heart's giving out. 6 months, maybe. I heard. I'm glad, David said. Not about dying, about you knowing, because I need to tell you something before it's too late. Julia wanted to leave, walk out right now and never look back. Instead, she stayed. I don't expect you to forgive me, David said. I don't even want you to, because forgiveness would mean you're carrying this weight too, and you've carried enough. But Julia, I need you to know, every single thing you said about me was true. I was selfish and addicted and cruel. I destroyed the best thing in my life because I was too cowardly to face my own failures. Is this your deathbed confession? Julia asked coldly. Are you trying to die with a clear conscience? No, David said. I'm trying to die knowing I finally told you the truth. The man you married was a mask. The man who had the affair was the real me, weak, entitled, running from consequences. But the man I've become this past year, Julia, that's real too, and you're the one who made him possible. Julia's throat tightened. Don't put that on me. I'm not. I'm just saying, you could have protected me from myself. You could have made excuses for me like everyone else did, but you let me fall, and falling taught me how to stand. A nurse entered, checking monitors, adjusting IV lines. Julia stood to leave. Wait, David said. One more thing. What? If you ever do forgive me, don't tell me. Keep it for yourself. You earned that peace. I don't need to know about it. Julia left without responding. In the hallway, she found Catherine waiting. How is he? Catherine asked. Dying with slightly more self-awareness than he lived, Julia replied. She drove home in a daze, David's words circling her mind. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat on her porch, watching the lake and thinking about forgiveness, what it meant, what it cost, whether it was even possible. 3 days later, Catherine called. He's stable enough to go home. Hospice will come to the house. I wanted you to know. Why? Because despite everything, you still care, and you deserve to know he's not alone. Julia thanked her and hung up. Then she did something she'd been avoiding for months. She called her therapist. I need an emergency session, Julia said. I'm about to make a very stupid decision, and I need someone to talk me out of it. 2 hours later, Julia sat in her therapist's office, explaining everything. So let me understand, Dr. Morrison said. Your ex-husband is dying. He's apologized sincerely. He's changed his behavior, and you're feeling guilty about not forgiving him. I'm feeling confused, Julia corrected, because I don't know if I care about him or if I just can't let go of the idea of who I thought he was. Those can both be true, Dr. Morrison said. Julia, you're not obligated to forgive someone who hurt you, even if they're dying, but you're also allowed to have complicated feelings. The question is, what do you need to do to find peace? Not for David, for yourself. Julia sat with that question. Finally, she said, I need to stop letting him take up so much space in my head, whether I forgive him or not. Then do that, Dr. Morrison said simply. Julia left the session feeling no clearer but somehow steadier. She went back to work, focused on her clients, lived her life. 2 weeks later, a package arrived at her office from David. Inside was a simple box containing a vintage watch, his father's watch, the one he'd inherited, and a note. Julia, this watch was my father's, worth about $75,000. I'm selling my father's entire collection and donating every cent to Resilience Consulting, not as a donation from me, I don't want credit, but as scholarships for women who can't afford your services. This is my father's apology to my mother that he never got to give. I'm giving it for both of us. You won't hear from me again unless you choose otherwise. But thank you for everything. David. Julia held the watch and cried for the first time since the divorce. Not angry tears, but something deeper. Grief for what could have been. Relief that it was over. and something else she couldn't quite name. She donated the watch money to her own scholarship fund, anonymously, so David would never know. But she kept the note, because sometimes the hardest truth to accept is that people can change, just not always in time to save what they destroyed. Chapter 10. The Reunion. Julia Olson had spent 2 years building a life without David Cruz, and one morning she woke up and realized she didn't want to anymore. It was a Thursday in late spring when Julia made her decision. The cherry blossoms were blooming in the city, turning every street into something achingly beautiful. She'd spent the morning meeting with a new client, a woman whose husband had gambled away their retirement, and found herself thinking about David's essay, his letter, his deathbed confession. 2 years had passed since the divorce, 18 months since David's collapse. He was still alive somehow. Hospice had given him 6 months, but he was still here, still working at the legal clinic part-time, still paying his mother back $500 every month. Julia had tracked his progress from a distance through Harrison and Catherine, never reaching out, never acknowledging she cared. But she did care. That was the truth she'd finally stopped running from. She picked up her phone and dialed Catherine. "What's David's address?" Catherine was silent for a long moment. "Julia, are you sure?" "No," Julia admitted, "but I need to do this anyway." Catherine gave her the address, a small apartment in Queens, nothing like the luxury condo they'd shared. Julia wrote it down, her hand steady. "Julia," Catherine said gently, "whatever you decide, make sure you're doing it for yourself. Not for me, not for David, for you." "I know," Julia said. She hung up and stared at the address. Then, before she could talk herself out of it, she got in her car and drove. David's apartment was in a quiet neighborhood, tree-lined and modest. Julia parked across the street and sat for 10 minutes, gathering courage. Finally, she got out and walked to his door. She knocked. Footsteps. Then the door opened, and David stood there staring at her like he was seeing a ghost. "Julia?" His voice cracked. He looked better than he had in the hospital, still thin, still tired, but alive. His eyes were clear, sober. "Can I come in?" Julia asked. David stepped aside wordlessly. His apartment was small but clean, books on every surface, a single couch, kitchen table covered in legal documents, pro bono cases he was working on, photos on the refrigerator, his mother, his sister, one picture of Julia from their wedding day, turned face down on a shelf. Julia noticed it immediately. "Why is that picture face down?" David followed her gaze, and his face went red. "Because looking at it hurt too much. Because I didn't earn the right to remember you that way." Julia walked to the photo and turned it face up. They looked so young, so stupidly happy. She felt 1,000 years older than that woman in the white dress. "Why are you here?" David asked quietly. Julia sat on his couch. Long silence. Then, "I've spent 2 years being angry at you. I built an empire on that anger. I became powerful because I refused to let your betrayal define me." David nodded, not speaking. "But I realized something," Julia continued. "I wasn't afraid of you dying. I was afraid of losing the possibility that one day you might actually become the man who deserved a second chance." David sat across from her, hands clasped between his knees. "Julia, I don't deserve a second chance, I know that." "I know you know," Julia said. "That's the problem. You've actually changed. You're not performing change to manipulate me. You're just different, and I don't know what to do with that." "What do you want to do?" David asked carefully. Julia looked at him, really looked, saw the man who'd hurt her and the man who'd learned from it, saw the addict who'd stolen from his mother and the son who was paying her back 1 month at a time, saw the husband who'd rewritten their history and the person who'd finally started telling the truth. "I want to stop letting you take up space in my head," Julia said, "whether that means forgiving you or just letting this go. I don't know yet, but I need to try something different than what I've been doing." "What have you been doing?" David asked. "Hating you," Julia said simply. It's exhausting." David's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Julia, for all of it, for every lie, every betrayal, every moment I made you feel like you weren't enough when you were always more than enough." "I know you are," Julia said. "But David, sorry isn't enough. It never will be. The question is, if I open that door even 1 inch, would you walk through it the right way?" David leaned forward, his voice shaking. "Julia, I can't promise perfect. I can't promise I'll never mess up or that I'll always get it right. But I can promise that every single day I will choose you with the same certainty I once chose to hurt you. I will earn back every moment of trust I destroyed, not with words, with years. And if it takes the rest of my life, I'll spend it proving I'm finally the man you thought you married." Julia made him wait. Let the silence stretch, uncomfortable and necessary. She watched him sit with uncertainty, the way she'd sat with it for years. Finally, she spoke. "One dinner, next Saturday. No history, no promises. We start from zero. You earn everything, my trust, my time, my respect, everything." David's tears spilled over. "I'll spend the rest of my life earning it." "I know you will," Julia said, "because if you don't, if you lie to me even once, if you take me for granted for even a moment, I'm gone, and this time I won't come back." "I understand," David whispered. Julia stood to leave. At the door she turned back. "David, that picture on your shelf, turn it face up, not because you've earned the memory, but because I'm giving you permission to hope." She left before he could respond, walked to her car on shaking legs, and sat in the driver's seat feeling like she'd just jumped off a cliff. She drove back to the lake house, her grandmother's letter sitting on the passenger seat where she'd placed it that morning. She read it again at every stoplight. "Let him watch you become everything you were meant to be, then decide if he's earned the privilege of standing beside you." Julia had become everything, built an empire, helped hundreds of women, found her own strength. Now she was deciding. She pulled into the driveway and sat looking at the house, her grandmother's house, where she'd fled after the divorce, where she'd rebuilt herself piece by piece. The sun was setting over the lake, painting everything gold. Julia pulled out her phone and texted Simone, "I just gave David another chance. I think I'm making a terrible mistake, or maybe the best decision of my life. I have no idea." Simone texted back immediately, "Only time will tell. But Jules, I'm proud of you for choosing something other than anger. That takes more courage than revenge ever did." Julia put her phone away and walked into the house. She made tea, sat on the porch, watched night fall over the water. Saturday felt both impossibly far away and terrifyingly close. She had 5 days to decide what she actually wanted, not what she thought she should want, not what would make the best story, but what would bring her peace. By Saturday morning, Julia still didn't have an answer. She dressed carefully. Jeans, a soft sweater, nothing too formal. This wasn't a date, it was something else. A conversation, a possibility. She drove to the restaurant they'd chosen, neutral ground, a quiet Italian place neither of them had been to before. David was already there, sitting at a corner table, looking as nervous as Julia felt. She slid into the booth across from him. "Hi," David said. "Hi," Julia replied. They ordered. Small talk about the weather, the restaurant, nothing of substance. Then the food came and they both fell silent, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down between them. Finally, Julia spoke. "Tell me about your work, the legal clinic." David's face lit up in a way she hadn't seen in years. "We help people who can't afford lawyers, immigration cases, housing disputes, family law. It's the first time I've practiced law where I actually care about the outcomes, where winning means someone keeps their home, or their kids, or their life." Julia listened as he talked about his cases, his clients, the people he was helping. She watched him lean forward, hands animated, passionate about something other than his own advancement. "You love it," she observed. "I do," David admitted. I know that sounds ridiculous coming from someone who used to bill $500 an hour to defend corporations. But Julia, this work matters. These people need someone to fight for them. And for the first time in my life, I'm actually being that person instead of just pretending to be. What changed? Julia asked. David set down his fork. You did. You showed me what it looked like to use power to help instead of to win. Every woman you've helped through divorce, every person you've given a second chance, that's what strength looks like. Not crushing someone because you can, lifting them up because you choose to. Julia felt something crack open in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition. This was real. Whatever else was true, David's change was genuine. They talked for 3 hours about his therapy, her business, Catherine's health, the years they'd lost. They didn't talk about getting back together, didn't make promises, just talked like two people learning each other again from scratch. When they finally stood to leave, David walked her to her car. Thank you, he said, for giving me this. Don't thank me yet, Julia replied. This was one dinner. You've got years of work ahead of you. I know, David said. Can I call you? Not every day. Just sometimes? Julia considered. Once a week, Thursdays. We'll talk. That's all I'm promising. That's more than I deserve, David said. Julia got in her car and drove away, watching David in her rearview mirror until he disappeared. She didn't know what would happen next, didn't know if they'd ever be together again, if trust could be rebuilt, if love could survive everything they'd put it through. But she knew one thing. She'd made a choice. Not to forgive completely, not to forget, but to stop letting anger run her life, to choose something harder than revenge or hatred. She'd chosen to see what happened next, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. That was